Hey Bob,
Yeah.
Diana left me this.
Hello, everyone. Oh, there I am. My name is Chris Hinds. I serve on Denver City Council representing District 10 in the heart of Denver. Thank you so much for coming to tonight's virtual town hall. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm checking. We've got two monitors here. Facebook Live looks great. So it looks like we're live on Facebook, even though mine says it's recording paused. So whatever, as long as we're live on Facebook, we obviously we're all trying new things with COVID and making sure that we stay healthy and physically distant, not necessarily socially distant. We want to make sure that we humans are pack animals after all, and so we want to make sure that we retain the community and the special thing that makes Denver what it is. But anyway, so Chris Hinds, Denver City Council. I represent all the area between Colfax, Colorado, and Spear. And then I also pick up the neighborhoods of Belcaro and Uptown. So I serve Central Denver, including Maury Middle School. And so if you are here tonight to learn a bit more about homelessness, homelessness in Denver, and specifically homelessness around Maury Middle School, thank you for coming. If you're not here, join the ride. We're really excited to have a large number of panelists. I know this is a huge, complicated topic. I know that so what we'll do is we'll take a few minutes at the beginning of the conversation and we'll talk about how this issue is far beyond Maury. It's a national and frankly international issue, but we also want to set this meeting up for success. And so we'll be directing the bulk of the conversation to topics that directly affect the area immediately around Maury. So we put this town hall together in just over a week. And so we're not maybe as organized as we could be, but it is clear that this is an important topic because we've had hundreds of people registered for this meeting, and we just posted the invitation on Friday. We've had more than 24 community service providers offer their expertise as well. Many of them are here and available as resources for tonight's virtual town hall. We've also had Denver Public School board members and staff interested in participating, and we only have 2 hours tonight, so we won't have an opportunity to hear from everyone, but I want to pose this question because of the intense amount of interest. So just put it in the back of your head. We are considering making a series of webinars. So this wouldn't just be the only one. There would be at least 2 more community presentations. The first would be specifically focused on Denver Public Schools. So the DPS board members that oversee Maury are not in town this week, and so they weren't able to participate. But we know we have a lot of interest from Maury Middle School parents. We have Maury Middle School staff and Denver Public School board members interested in participating. So if that is a focus that is of interest to you, think about it now. Email district10@denvergov.org if that is of interest, and we'll see if we can make that happen if there is interest in the next week or 2. So basically, it's dependent on the schedule of our DPS colleagues. We're also considering putting together a third town hall presentation focused on community service providers. So tonight we'll talk a fair amount about what the city can do and has done and will do, and some of the things that our community service providers have done. But maybe with more than 24 providers expressing interest, maybe it makes sense for us to share with you tonight some of the things that the city can do, and then in a week or 2 after the DPS presentation, again, if that makes sense, to talk about what all of our community groups are providing and what resources they can bring to the table as well. So if we tackle this from many different angles, we have a higher chance of success. So if either or both of those sound interesting to you, again, please email district10@denvergov.org. To set expectations, homelessness wasn't created in a day, and it won't be solved today. But here are some of the things that we plan to talk about tonight. We plan to talk about the camping ban. We plan to talk about safe open spaces, also known as the designated sanctioned campsites. We plan to talk about how the city has addressed homelessness and how COVID has changed that approach and how the city has modified the approach post-COVID. And perhaps most importantly for this conversation, we plan to talk about specific concerns for residents around Morey, both in tents and in homes. So who do we have available to speak tonight? We have, like I said, a boatload of people. We have city participants. So we have the mayor's office. We have the Office of Housing Stability. We have the Denver Department of Public Health and Environment. We have the Denver Police Department. We have the Denver Fire Department. We have the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. We have the City Attorney's Office, and we have the District 10 staff. So Councilperson Hinds and my entire team, all of us are here, and so we're here to facilitate and support the conversation as best we can. We also have several people from Denver Public Schools and specifically from Morey here as well to provide input. And then we have a bunch of community groups. And so just to list some of them, because we were still making the list as of like 3 minutes ago. We have Capitol Hill United Neighbors. We have Network Coffee House. We have the Harm Reduction Action Center, Denver Urban Gardens, which is right there at Morey, among other places. We have Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. We have Mental Health Centers of Denver. We have the Dolores Project, Metro Denver Homeless Initiative. We have the St. Francis Center. We have Denver Homeless Out Loud. And we have a few of the residents currently in tents around Morey. Just to be sure, we did extend an invitation to a couple of the neighbors around Morey who live in homes. We didn't get any accepting our invitation as of now. I don't know if we're gonna see if we can reach out a little bit more, but certainly we extended that invitation, and I'm nervous. So I can understand how some people might feel like broadcasting to 500 people and on Zoom, and then also simulcasting to Facebook and having multiple members of the media as attendees. I could see how that might be intimidating. Let's talk a little bit about meeting expectations. And holy cow, I am like blazing through this. We were budgeting far more time for me to go through these things. So I'm actually feeling good because I was afraid that we were going to not have time. We were going to talk a lot about setting the stage, and we were going to have time to ask questions, but we will definitely have time to ask questions and answer questions. Someone is asked, can we change the view so that it is less confusing? And so if you are in Zoom, up in the upper right corner, there is a button called, or that is listed as speaker view. And if you click on speaker view, you get all me, or whoever's speaking at the time. So, so that if you feel like the 25 people who I have on my screen is a little busy for you, you can click on the speaker view, and then you get 100% me, or whoever's speaking at the time. So let's talk a little bit about expectations for tonight's meeting. This is an incredibly emotional issue for all residents, those living in tents and those living in houses. And please understand and respect that we are all people, and we should be respectful to one another, because we are At the end of the day, we are all people. Let's do our best to find solutions that work for everyone. And we have a bunch of panelists. We didn't have an opportunity to touch base with all of you ahead of time. If you have input, please use the raised hand button when you want to join in. Also, please announce your name and organization before speaking every time. Chris Hinds, Denver City Council. Just so that because we have so many different panelists, I think it will make sense for all of those watching that we know who's speaking and for whom you're speaking. For attendees, please send questions through the Q&A function. There is a button down at the bottom. Actually, it looks like we already have 4 questions. So, so some of you have already found the Q&A chat function. If you haven't found it, it's at the bottom of the Zoom, and it's just Q&A, and we will certainly be taking your questions and answering some of those real time. So let's see. I know if you have a question, also if you have a question for a specific panelist, let us know in the question who you would like the question to be directed towards. We're also live streaming this on Facebook, and if it does turn out that we hit the 500 member cap, we actually upgraded our Zoom membership twice. But if we do end up hitting the full cap, which seems likely at this point, you can also tell all your friends. They can go to facebook.com/DenverPerfect10, and we are live streaming there right now. So,
Chris?
Yes.
Before we dive in, since I'm going to be sharing some of the Q&A, we've had some neighbors that live around Maury that have offered to be panelists since we didn't have someone beforehand to speak. Would you like me to add them?
Yeah, that would be great. And so after the, so I want to kind of set the stage for tonight's discussion. I do want to give the city an opportunity. I think I want to start with host, give the city an opportunity to give a basic introduction of what the city's response has been pre-COVID and then post-COVID to homelessness. And then I think after that, I think it makes sense for us to hear from the community of people experiencing homelessness to maybe talk for 3 or 4 minutes or 5 minutes on their experience as well. Is that okay, Liz?
Works great.
Super. Okay, so so setting the stage for tonight's discussion, I am almost done talking honest. So we'll hear more from our panelists very soon. So as I mentioned from the beginning, there are some issues outside of our control in the city of Denver. Homelessness is a national and international issue. Here are some of the things that we can't control. Housing affordability nationwide continues to rise. And that was pre-COVID, but certainly COVID hasn't helped. The lack of housing stock nationwide continues to be a pressure against this topic, again, nationwide pre-COVID. We have a lack of a living wage nationwide, and rent has gone up 80% in the last 9 years in the city of Denver. And while we are trying to do our part in the city of Denver by raising the minimum wage, I voted in favor of raising the minimum wage, as did a lot of my colleagues. And thank you to the mayor's office for your support in that as well. That is, minimum wage and a living wage are not necessarily the same. We're also experiencing a nationwide defunding of addiction services, mental health treatment, social workers. My mom was a social worker for decades. We don't have a nationwide coordinated response to housing or at least shelter services. And then of course, COVID has created a huge curveball in the problem and in our response. CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, has issued guidance on cleaning encampments, the jail population reductions that we've done, and many other cities and counties have done to limit COVID outbreaks. We have a lot of voluntary shelters nationwide have experienced COVID outbreaks. COVID has significantly increased unemployment, and we're doing what we can in Denver to prevent those folks from becoming homeless too. Our statewide eviction moratorium has expired, and of course, we don't know the full effect of that just yet, but that potentially could add to our population of people experiencing homelessness too. I also want to help all of you be efficient when you're expressing your concerns. Just to talk a little bit about the different branches of government, I am in the legislative branch. The legislative branch of government makes legislation. And so if you believe a law should be changed, created, modified, removed, I am definitely the right place. The executive branch executes that legislation. And so if you believe the execution of our laws is good, or if it needs improvement, we have several people here tonight who are in the executive branch of the city, and they'll speak and they'll help us, ensure that we understand what the laws are and how the city is implementing those laws. And then also there are national and state laws, and in many cases, those laws supersede our laws. So the last thing, let's lay the groundwork for Maury Middle School. So as I understand it, and Therese, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there are about 100 or 120 people living in tents around Maury. Many were living next to St. John's, and then they moved to Maury when the cathedral was cleaned by the city. I think that was on May 20th. Most of our panelists here tonight, if you look at the big screen of all of us, most of our panelists have personally visited Maury. I know that I generally visit Maury multiple times a week, and I was there when the St. John's cleanup happened. So I would venture to say that most of the people who are panelists here have personal, on the ground, firsthand experience with what's going on around Maury. We've heard from our housed neighbors that they don't feel safe. We've heard from all of our neighbors, housed and unhoused, that there isn't sufficient access to bathrooms, sanitation, water, services, and power charging and devices for camp residents. We've heard from DPS staff, elected officials, and parents who say that we need a plan to ensure safety for students when they return. And we've heard from our many community partners that they're willing, able, and interested in helping wherever they can. Okay, I'm done. So as I teased a minute ago with Liz, let's start the conversation by hearing from some of our panelists. First question, I think the one that makes sense to start the conversation, I direct it to host, and the mayor's office or DDPHE wants to weigh in, that's great. How is the city addressing homelessness, and how has COVID affected the city's response to homelessness? Chris, are you here?
That's to me, Chris.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman. Thank you, community, for the opportunity to share this evening. My name's Chris Connor. I direct homeless response for the Department of Housing Stability for the city of Denver. I'm not going to spend too much time in the pre-COVID environment. What I will say about the pre-COVID environment, many of you folks have been familiar with that, is we were enjoying at the time a lot of strategizing and partnership among our community-based providers around some of the things that COVID forced us to enact upon. So it forced us to move from a planning and thinking to an actual doing, which, if there's any silver lining to our COVID experience, it's been that. What precipitated that action, of course, is the crisis of it. So I'll focus on going back to February, where our shelter network, our shelter system, was at the cusp of breaking. And when I say that it's at the cusp of breaking, we had providers and programs telling us that they were facing the unprecedented context to make the hard decisions about potentially shutting down. That's the same time when that impossible order came through that everybody had to go home. Impossible for people experiencing homelessness, those folks that we were serving. So what that meant for our providers was they were struggling with their built environments, with their facilities, because they were given a firm and hard defined metric around social spacing as well, so that individuals needed to go home, and if they were around other people, they needed to stay 6 feet apart. We found that quickly that our providers weren't equipped to do that in their current environments. The other factor that really weighed in is a lot of our providers really depended on staffing through volunteers or staffing through actual staff who were at very high risk. So the messaging went out that folks who were 65 and older, the elders in our communities were specifically supposed to be protected in the COVID environment. So we had a lot of providers who had to make the hard choice of during the time when more people were coming in, to say to their committed volunteers, many of whom were retirees and such, that they could not come in and volunteer anymore. And they had their own staff in direct service roles also contracting COVID at the time, or putting a chilling factor on arriving to work because nobody knew how things would pan out. And so a lot of our providers emerged in that crisis saying, you know, we don't know if we can sustain the normal course of the operation anymore. And that threw the city into a challenge. In our first week, this is back when we were preparing for snowstorms, and now we're preparing for 100-degree weather. That threw us into the sense of we need to pull that community together. And it's not so much what the city compelled and decided to do as the broad base of our community partners and your neighbors doing this work. What they came to identify is that they couldn't sustain running their own programs, but by working together and forging new partnerships and moving into larger facilities and locations that could enable the social distancing factor, they could prevail through the pandemic. So we knew that we needed to plan for a number of things that we weren't providing at that time. We needed to plan for social spacing, that's 6 feet apart for every single guest. We needed to plan for some integrated health. So we needed to know that we had a health presence that could meet every single guest who was accessing. And we needed an answer for now what if we were to identify somebody who was carrying COVID. And we knew that we needed to identify and solve for a 24-hour program. We couldn't sustain through the pandemic with a shelter system that was only available to people to come in and sleep overnight, because everybody was supposed to stay home. So we needed spaces that were staffed well enough to facilitate keeping everybody at home. So to that end, we built our strategies from there. Our strategies largely are the auxiliary shelters that we're running out at National Western and the Denver Coliseum. Beyond that, we identified motel strategies. So we got quickly on the clip to identify motel resources where we could put people who we were identifying were potentially carrying COVID or particularly susceptible to succumbing to that disease if they were to catch it. Between those two strategies and some existing shelters that could remain open, last night, for instance, we brought over 1,600 guests in for an overnight capacity, all of whom could stay throughout the day where they are, all of whom could reserve a bed. Nearly 1/3 of those, 31% of them, 526, are people that we're not placing in a congregate shelter environment. They're people that we've placed into a motel room. Those motel rooms are identified to people who are 65 and older or have underlying medical conditions that COVID would have a disastrous outcome to. Or they're folks identified through testing within shelters or within hospitals or within clinics to be carrying COVID, and we'll put them in a motel for the duration that they're carrying that condition. The majority of them, though, however, are not carrying COVID. It's a protective measure. We're 495 guests in a motel that doesn't have a top end of the duration of stay, that we're placing them in the motel for the course of the pandemic because we want to keep them as safe as possible. So that's brought us to kind of the state where we're at. And since March 17th, only in those auxiliary shelters of National Western and Coliseum, there's 3,581 individuals unique individuals who have accessed those resources and benefited from that. We've been housing people through the course of the pandemic too, and looking forward, because we know that those resources will not remain with us forever in perpetuity. Eventually, we're going to need to stand down to a new COVID normal. We can't go back to the normal course of doing things prior to the pandemic, but we need to define what that new normal is and build to order to that. We're looking forward on strategies of rehousing assistance. So I can't provide too much detail on what it translates to programmatically because we're in an active procurement, but right now we're procuring for $4.5 million of rehousing assistance to help us back out of that emergency response where we needed to do a quick pivot and position us for a better long game on resolving this issue through housing. Because we don't want to make the mistake or indicate that shelter is a replacement for housing opportunity. We're focused on what solves homelessness, and our interest is in housing as many people as possible. So we want to seize upon that opportunity to do that. What we've learned, and I'll finish up, but what we've learned through the experience is a lot of what we were planning for is what people want and will gravitate to. We've never been able to bring as many people inside before because of the lack of the 24-hour opportunity, because of the lack of that social spacing, that medical attention, that round-the-clock care, and that access to housing opportunity as well. So we're learning. I think that's been the benefit for the providers that have been involved, is that they were able to take the ideas and the strategies, and they were forced into enacting them in a new environment. And we're trying to figure out where do we get to backing out of that to make it sustainable. Finally, for our outreach presence, and this is what bears mostly upon the Maury Middle School situation, is we're focused now on building an outreach strategy that can go deeper into larger encampment settings. So rather than my team of outreach workers who's accustomed to be deployed throughout the city, we're trying to get them to focus in and go deep on one environment for a sustained amount of time, for however long it takes to focus and get to know those residents, their needs, and place a match to them that's service oriented. So I'm sure there will be more questions about that and we can talk more, but would like to also move the opportunity to our other panelists and hear from the community.
On the mayor's office, Evan, are you here, and would you like to provide anything? Sweet.
Thanks, Councilman. And thank you to members of the community for participating here. I don't have much to add. That was really thorough, what Chris Connor just provided, but I think that there's maybe a relevant question, which is, why does it feel like we are seeing so many more unhoused folks on the street? And I don't know that we have a good answer that's comprehensive. I think COVID has played a part in that. And maybe that's a question that we could pose back to Chris Connor and to some other panelists, because I do think that that's at least in part at the heart of what this conversation is about. Why, and how do we address that in a way that is meaningful?
Yeah, I think that is a good question, and I think that is a question that many people have asked me. So, Chris, do you have any additional thoughts?
Yeah, certainly, and I'd invite our panelists from public health to also weigh in on this. I think it does feel like there's an increase, and there may well be that increase at street level homelessness too. I think the feeling of it has been that encamped areas have endured for a longer period of time. I think the challenge that the city's faced with, and again, there's other experts, I think, in public health, has been to balance the reality of COVID and the guidances that we're understanding from experts in the field nationally around how to approach COVID within encampments, with the other public health urgencies that encampments have oftentimes been the site of. So the CDC guidance has kind of suggested that, for in terms of COVID, that, if you're working with a group of people that can't go home and aren't going into access shelter, that maybe the best thing to do is to allow them to remain in one place rather than dispersing or scattering that encampment. And so we're trying to balance those strategies, or I feel public health was in the city was trying to balance those strategies alongside the other issues that come up as encampments continue to endure. But I'll defer to the other folks around the table.
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
Well, Chris, you mentioned public health, and so I feel the need to chime in here. I think the question was, are we seeing more people on the street? And I certainly don't have data on that. I had thought, though, that Host or perhaps some of your partners had done somewhat of an informal survey to figure out where are people coming from outside of Denver. I don't have that data, but I thought perhaps maybe somebody in Host did. I don't know if that's true or not, but I think that gets somewhat at the question. You had also mentioned, that maybe we're seeing not just more encampments, but we're seeing that they have degraded to the point that we have never seen before. And I think to some extent that is true. I think that's a fair statement. And some of that is, I think, can be contributed to the fact that we had held off longer than we might have from the Department of Public Health, because we are very much battling more than just one outbreak here. I know that when we talk about, CDC's guidelines, and they are guidelines, I'm asked often, why is DDPHE not complying with CDC's laws? They are guidelines, and I know that if you look on their website today, it'll still say that, it'll say what it said almost from the beginning, that encampments shouldn't be addressed or shouldn't be moved or shouldn't be displaced. But in this department, we've had conversations directly with members of CDC, and while their website still says what it says, they've acknowledged that absolutely you can be battling more than one outbreak, and you have to balance your approach in addressing multiple public health risks. And I'll tell you what I'm talking about here in more detail. When we talk about addressing the public and environmental health impacts from encampments, I get the question a lot about, well, you don't want to send them into shelters because they could be exposed to COVID-19. So people are often referencing the pandemic when they think about being exposed to COVID-19, and displacing encampments might put more people at risk with the pandemic. But what is not often discussed is that we are also addressing outbreaks that stem from encampments. In fact, for many, many months now, we've had well over 100 people, primarily those that are in encampments, living on the streets, that have contracted hepatitis A. And we are also now seeing the early signs of what might be a shigellosis outbreak. Again, not in shelter settings, but primarily those that are in encampments. And so I want to put some context to that, because while the CDC does say, be careful about addressing encampments, and the measures that we've taken in DDPHE are not inconsistent with other public health departments across the country. When encampments get to the point where there's some serious public health concerns and environmental health concerns, we need to address those. And when we address those, we try very, very hard to work with our partners at Housing Stability to connect those people with services, to get them into a better situation that they're in. And I want to stress that there are encampments in Denver that we do not act on because they don't present the type of risks that we see perhaps at Maury and Veterans Park. So I just want to share those comments before they get too far away from the conversation, that we have held off. We've been very diligent in our use of and conservative with our public health enforcement measures to address encampments, because we do recognize that we are in a pandemic. But again, again, not to overstress this, but people often think that, well, you should leave them there because if you chase them into shelters, you're exposing them to COVID-19. But they have been exposed to outbreaks in the settings that they're in. So every step of the way, we've adhered to CDC's guidelines, but we're not just trying to address the pandemic and COVID-19. We've had other outbreaks. So it's all about balance. And we're looking at doing things differently because we are in unprecedented times here. And I think we are going to get to the point where we talk about the safe outdoor sites that the mayor recently announced. And Chris, Councilman, you can decide when it's time for that. But I did want to just, put some context to what we do in DDPHE with addressing the public health risks and trying to find balance between multiple outbreaks, not just COVID-19.
And that was Bob McDonald, Executive Director of Denver Department of Public Health and Environment. Bob, one other question for you. Do you have information or data specifically on non-COVID outbreaks around Maury?
I don't have it in front of me, Councilman. I can certainly check with our staff to see, can they pinpoint where we've seen hepatitis A cases. And again, we're seeing early signs of an uptick in shigellosis cases in persons experiencing homelessness, not so much in shelters again, but in an outdoor setting. And I can certainly get that information. I just don't have it in front of me.
Fair enough. Okay. Thank you. How about the next question? And so we did find at least one housed neighbor immediately next to Maury. And so I want to ask the next question to Stella, who lives in one of the encampments immediately around Maury. And then we'll have, so maybe about 5 minutes. And then another 5 minutes for one of the housed residents around Maury. So Stella, a question for you. Tell us, you're muted right now. Tell us a bit about your experience with homelessness and what is it like living next to Maury? And I don't know, oh, there we go, yeah.
Thank you for having me on this panel, Councilman. My experience with homelessness has been going on and off for the last 15 years. And I fortunately have been housed several times in between, but I always felt when I got housed that I left people behind that were a little bit clueless in the maze. So this time I decided to be homeless, not by chance, but I made myself homeless. And this group of residents around Moore Middle School, which call ourselves the Clarkson P Village or 10 Village, used to be across from the church or the cathedral, and we were moved. Well, we weren't really moved. We moved ourselves after we were somewhat evicted. And they came together around the church based on the fact that churches traditionally around the world have been there for people in crisis. And for one reason or the other, they tried to help, but between the city and the church board, etc., we were asked to leave. The nearest that we found was on the other side of the street, which is Murray, and we really do thank the Denver Public Schools for allowing us to stay there because they were our only advocate at one time. And we are planning to move. I personally would not like us to be there when school reopens because as much as we're a community, they're in
It's like we may have lost Stella. Hey, Therese, are you are you here? Are you available to speak? We may have lost Therese as well. Okay. Oh, there's Stella. Stella's back. And Stella, you are muted. Stella, unfortunately, you are still muted. Let's see if I can unmute you.
Yeah. So we're at Maury Middle School, and there has been issues, and we've tried to address those as a community. You know, the cleaning up the garbage, the noise. I mean, the list is long, and I do understand has been how the commencement of the community at large. The are you? You were there. Am I there? You switch back. When you switch back to me.
We can hear you, Stella.
Can you hear me? All right, as long as you can hear me, it's okay. Yeah, the 17th of next month when school officially opens, I know the teachers are coming back from the first, etc. But it's kind of like a D-Day of us finding and executing another option, right? Just to let the residents, the house residents of the community know, we are erecting permanent structures there. We, like they, are fighting the COVID-19 virus. And according to the CDC guidelines, I would rather keep all these people next to me than have to hunt them down on every corner around the city. And so yesterday, Denver Health came down and tested us, and we're trying to act as a community. And I know some of the concerns of the house residents, and I've tried to address them as much as possible to the other members or the other residents of the tent village. Now, the health department has some issues. We've tried to incorporate some of the top issues in terms of the garbage, etc. And thanks to the city, they've given us garbage cans, and they come every day. And we addressed some of the nutritional needs of the community. We have a community kitchen, and many faith-based organizations come by every day and give us food, that thereby allowing us to stay where we are. The whole idea is to stay where we are. The more that we venture out is the more that we come in contact with people that could possibly change 100% negative to the COVID virus state. So we stay around the church, around the school for now. Yesterday, St. Francis Center had offered us a few alternatives, and they have been very useful to us because they had offered land, from the beginning, and now they're offering to house a tent village. So we are looking at alternatives and looking at the date of August 17th to see if we can put something in place. Many of the residents are stubborn. They're used to living on the street. And I was asked when we were moved from the church last month, why don't we go to the shelter? A large majority of the residents in the tent village have had very negative experiences in shelters. And so they take their chances with the environment. Mother Nature seems like a better solution to them. So it's not that we're opposed to going there, we're just opposed to the whole how shelters are run by providers. And so we're the stragglers of the homelessness. But as I asked yesterday to the St. Francis providers, why can't they use this tent village and any other tent village as a path to curing homelessness. Instead of having to go to a shelter to then be housed, why can't we be housed directly from the tents, you know, and without the intermittent or the intermediate moving? But some people just can't go to the shelters. Those are the people I represent that have been, you know, neglected over time. So that's what, you know, we're there, and we do understand the major concerns of the community, and they are being addressed as much as possible. And I think we're doing a really good job. I myself have had the unfortunate job of evicting people from the tent community. It's not really good, but they were just refusing to behave as a community, and they've gone and either house themselves elsewhere or join other communities that will allow them to behave in that way. So, you know, we are trying to follow some of the guidelines from all the different agencies, as well as, you know, just even the providers themselves. And try to put our rules, take rules from other providers and incorporate in the rules that we follow. So you know, I'm willing to address any members of the community or any group of the house members of the community on any issue that they believe is not being addressed in the tent village. You know, that's why I'm here, to hear what they have to say.
Well, thank you. I think that's a perfect segue.
Is there any specific questions?
Yeah, so thank you. I think that's a perfect segue for the next set of questions, or the next question. Certainly, we want to you know, get a perspective of people experiencing homelessness. We also want to get the perspective of people next to people experiencing homelessness. So I believe Ms. Kozakowski, is that your name? Sweet. So I think I want to ask you a very similar question. Basically, tell me about your experience with people experiencing homelessness next to you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Gladly. Thanks for inviting me. And yes, so I lived in my condo at Washington between 13th and 14th for about 3 months, from late March until the very end of June. And I have since moved away because I really found the situation to be uninhabitable. While there may be some efforts to help people transition out of homelessness, and I applaud those, the reality for those of us living across the street is that the widespread homelessness right across the street from us was creating some really unsanitary conditions and unsafe conditions for us as residents. So the act of being homeless may not be illegal, but there's a lot of other activity that goes on in a camp like that I witnessed firsthand that is illegal. And it is difficult to get the police to come to your aid when you are calling probably for the 100th time this month to report an act of vandalism to your car, or someone that you saw urinating between two cars, or even open drug use. And those are some of the things that I experienced in my time there. I got to the point where I would not walk my dog by myself around the neighborhood because I didn't feel unsafe. I had to go on buddy walks with my husband because, being a single woman, I don't want to be out there and be vulnerable. There is also sort of an unfairness to where this is being allowed to happen or where it is happening in our community. So for those of us who live in Capitol Hill, I think it's a familiar sight. If you move, a mile south into the Spear neighborhood or over into the Cherry Creek neighborhood, they're not dealing with these same problems. So the burden of this kind of community impact is not borne evenly across our community. And it creates a really unfair situation for those of us living in Capitol Hill.
Thank you. Thank you for that response. I think we have, I'm not sure we have another neighbor yet, but we might be looking to see if we can find another neighbor here in a second. I do
Chris?
have a question. I think we have the city attorney's office on as well. And so my next question would be for the city attorney's office. What is the strip that's between the sidewalk and street? Whose property is that? And what are the laws surrounding camping there?
Yes, thanks. This is Marley Bordowski. I'm with the Denver City Attorney's Office. Glad to be here and talking to this group. So the strip between the sidewalk and the curb is called a tree lawn. For those of you who wanted to know that little detail, it's a tree lawn. It's part of the right of way, but it's a part of the right of way that is next and adjacent to privately owned property. And as private property owners, the owner of that property that's next to that tree lawn area and the sidewalk is responsible for the maintenance of that area. They don't own it, but they're responsible for making sure trash is picked up, for making sure that it's, if it's grass that's in that tree lawn area, that grass is kept alive. So while you cannot say you own that property, or you cannot say that people cannot be on that property, you still are responsible for maintaining that property. It's kind of like the sidewalk that's next to your house. You're responsible for removing the snow from that property. You don't own it. You're responsible for keeping the snow off of it, and you can't keep people off of it. So it's a unique piece of property that is adjacent to where the property that you own. Similar things can be said for adjacent alleyways. So if you have property that abuts an alleyway, you are also responsible for the maintenance of that alley to the midsection of that alley, even though you don't own that property. So 30,000 foot view of everything. That's the law surrounding those tree lawn areas.
Because it does seem like the people who are experiencing homelessness are using tents in that tree lawn. And so the way the law works, I'm just trying to make sure that I understand the way the law works. It is because of who controls that tree lawn. A private property, the adjacent property owner does not have the ability to exercise private property rights that they might otherwise have.
That's absolutely right, Chris. So while you're responsible for it, you can't exercise private property rights on it. There are things that you can do as private property owners, most of which would require a permit through the city. So you can, for example, if the grass is dying, it's a tree lawn that has grass on it, and the grass is dying, you could secure a permit through what's now called DOTI, used to be Public Works, but now it's the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. You could get a permit to perhaps fence off the property to allow the grass to grow back, or you could get a permit to change the landscaping of that area. So there are some things that you can do that aren't necessarily the rights of a private property owner over that area, but you can change what's on that property as far as maintenance. You can also, if you'd like to erect planters, for example, in an area that doesn't have planters, you can also get a permit through DOTI. All of this requires permits through the city, but you could exercise a little bit of control over that property to change either what's in it or how it's growing or how it's being maintained, if that helps.
So there's a comment about DRMC 49246 that says it is a property owner's right and responsibility to remove encumbrances in the right of way. Are you familiar with that? I'm not trying to put you on the spot. If you're not familiar with it. Okay.
And if you don't maintain it, absolutely. I'm looking at the comment right now. Thanks, Stephen. If you don't maintain it, the city can come in and maintain it for you. Of course, there may be some liability connected to that, but yes, the city can, if it gets bad enough, can come in and maintain that that area for you. So I'm not sure what else to say about that. You do have a responsibility to remove things that are in it. So, I mean, that can get pretty awful as far as encumbrances or trash or other things that might be in that right-of-way area. But yes, it is your responsibility to maintain it.
Okay, so the next question I would like to ask is, I would like to direct it towards Chief Thomas. Chief, if you are available, this is an enforcement question. I'm not asking you about the city council side, but the urban camping ban was passed by city council in 2012, and from an enforcement perspective, what does the camping ban entail? And certainly there are people who say, why isn't it getting enforced? So just like to get the Denver Police Department perspective. Thank you.
So this is again, Chief Thomas from the Denver Police Department. And Chris, I thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. But essentially the Denver Police Department, in conjunction with the Mayor's Office and DDPHE, collectively have essentially decided to refrain from enforcing the camping ban in these identified areas, sort of in compliance with CDC guidelines, and really kind of waiting for some alternative solutions. And I know right now we're talking about safe outdoor spaces, and so we're certainly looking forward to that coming on board so that we can find safe legal locations for people to be, so that we can enforce in these areas where we understand that the public would like us to enforce.
All right, well, super. Thank you. As always, you're succinct. I love it. You caught me so quickly. So I guess the next question that I'd like, so thank you, Chief Thomas. And so the next question I'd like to ask is maybe directed to the Mayor's Office. Evan, if you're there, can you talk about the general timelines regarding safe open spaces and how this community around Maury fits in?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question, Councilman. And I think if Chris Connor and maybe Bob McDonald can help out with the answer as well, we might, that would be good. So what we are, and this is a good segue from what Chief Thomas just said too. So what we're trying to do with the encampment that is around Maury right now is begin to engage the folks who are encamped there. We had folks from Denver Health and the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless and some other groups began earlier this week to come up and start doing some COVID testing and some screening, even driving some folks to some motel rooms. What we are hoping is that by providing some different types of options, the kinds of options that folks have been asking for, we can begin to decamp that environment. I think Stella mentioned August 17th, and that's the date that students are scheduled to return to school there. Where we are concerned about the environment that teachers, when they come back at the end of July, beginning of August, and then kids on August 17th, that is a safe environment for everybody. And so we're going to be working over the next several weeks to continue what we started this week by bringing some additional services, having conversations about different types of solutions and different types of options that will work for people. We're trying to do this in a way that really is meaningful, does not lead to conflict, is done in a way that is respectful and with dignity for everybody. And we know that this is, it's a difficult, somebody used the word unfair. It's unfair in many, many ways for for just about everybody involved. And we're trying to navigate our way through this as best as we can. Again, recognizing that teachers are scheduled to come back in a few weeks and students a couple of weeks after that.
We actually have the principal of Maury, Hillary. I think you had mentioned in the chat. Do you want to chat about the time frame for returning back to Maury, both teachers and students? And while it doesn't show you as muted, I can't hear you.
Councilman, while she's trying to figure that out, there's an additional piece of timing, and that is specific to the safe outdoor space proposal from the Colorado Village Collaborative. Our hope is to identify the first site, finalize that in the next couple of days, and then have the site up and running sometime in the second half of July. We're trying to do this as quickly as possible.
Great. Hillary, you want to give it another try? No. I can read lips, but not well. Okay, so while we give Hillary another pause, I think I saw Cole Chandler is here as well. I think he is one of the presenters. Cole, do you want to talk about the Colorado Village Collaborative and the concept of the safe open spaces, excuse me?
Sure, thanks for having me on, Councilman Hinds. I'm Cole Chandler. I'm the director of the Colorado Village Collaborative. And with several partners over the last several months, we have advanced a proposal for safe outdoor spaces, which would be a temporary option that is COVID specific for people experiencing homelessness, that aims to do two things, primarily, first and foremost, to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 amongst unhoused folks. And then second, to extend equitable access to resources, including hotels, protective action and activated respite, healthcare screening, and other necessary services. And so these spaces are resource rich. They would have bathrooms, they would have hand washing sinks, they would have access to food, internet, electricity, lighting, all these kinds of things that we all need in order to thrive and survive in this society. And they would also be service rich. There would be outreach workers that would be able to stop by. We would have mental health services located on site on a daily basis, and they would be fully staffed around the clock with folks that are trained in conflict resolution, de-escalation, and these sorts of skills. And so that proposal has gone back and forth with the mayor's office for a couple of months, and we've continued to refine it by studying other models like this around the country that have sprung up specifically in response to COVID. And at this point, we're ready to begin moving forward to stand up the first of multiple sites. I know the mayor's office sent out a letter today to several city council members who have supported this proposal, inviting those council members to come forward and present a site that's within their district to potentially host a safe outdoor space. And so we're looking forward to continuing to work with council and the mayor's office and folks on the streets like Stella and others that are looking to get into safe spaces so that they can have access to the resources that we all need.
Great, thank you. Okay, so let's see. Maybe this next question could be directed to Bob McDonald, DDPHE, if you're still here. I think you had touched on this before, but perhaps you could go into a little more detail. I hear that different camps have different needs. Can you compare and contrast, ideally, Maury camps with other camps? I know that the other, one of the other major encampments in District 10 is Liberty Park, and I personally have, I was there when the Liberty Park was shut down for public health reasons. Was there when the St. John's happened, but I'm to me, from an outsider's perspective, it seems like those two communities are different. I'm curious to hear if you, from DDPHE's perspective, think that to be the case. And then I would ask Therese Howard the same question once you're finished with that. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Councilman. It's an excellent question. My staff members visit all the encampments almost on a daily basis, and I want to say that I do too. I don't, unfortunately, in the middle of a pandemic here, I'm not able to get out as much as the field staff are, but I have seen Maury. I've seen 29th and Arkins. I've seen 22nd, and of course, Veterans Park is right outside the building that I work in. And when we prioritize encampments, we look at a number of things. It's not just the, to what extent has it degraded, how much trash, how much litter, how much various forms of hazards are there? Is there a rodent infestation? We look at all those things, of course, in addition to, are there environmental concerns? Do we see things washing down into the storm drains? Are they washing down into a nearby river? So we look at public health risks, and we look at environmental health risks. In addition to that, we also take into account where is the encampment, because there are concerns with, I recently had an email sent to me from a citizen who was concerned about walking through an encampment to get to, I don't recall now if it was her place of employment or perhaps it was to get her child to a school. Forgive me, I don't recall, but those are the things that we take into account too. Are people having to pass through an area that might present a risk to them? And then to what extent do those conditions present risks to those that are living in the encampment? Because our efforts are to protect them as well. And so, and again, we look at the location of it. Is it next to a river? Is it next to an apartment complex? Is it in a park that is somewhat isolated, a little bit like Veterans Park versus closer to residential areas? Because if we get a rodent infestation and if that expands out to the community, that can be difficult to control. So there are many things that we look at. We prioritize those based on all of those things. And then we have to collaborate with Chris Connor's group and host, and we try to get outreach workers out there to get people connected to services before we do anything. And so we prioritize all of that. I don't know that I'm prepared to say, well, I would say this place is worse than that place, because they seem to change almost on a daily basis, if not a weekly basis. And so, but I have seen all of them. And we do have a schedule to address all of them in a timely manner. But to Evan Dreyer's earlier point, we're trying to implement some strategies, some harm reduction strategies that we've not implemented in the past. And I'm going to be honest here, that even in a safe outdoor space, while that mitigates some of the risks of living outdoors, that there are some challenges with that as well. It's not risk-free. And I will never be in a position where I can say that even a safe outdoor space is better than an indoor space. It is a harm reduction strategy. It's something that that we're going to work on with Cole's team to try to implement that as we try to navigate through the pandemic. But those are all the things that we look at. I think that, certainly Maury is a priority. Veterans Park is a priority. We've got some encampments that are around 22nd that are also a priority, and we're going to try to address those as timely as we can. The goal here is to try to connect those people with services and to get them into venues that haven't been available in the past. We have activated respite now that has been provided by host and hotel rooms and now safe outdoor sites. The goal is to try to get them, people in those encampments, connected to those venues, connected to those services, do some COVID-19 testing before we try to go in and clean up and address some of the public health and environmental health risks. So we're not going to let those conditions go unaddressed, but we are going to be a little bit slower and try to get people connected before we go in and address the public and the environmental health risks. And I hope that addresses the question, but if not, I'm happy to take another stab at it. I also see Chris might have his hand up.
Yeah, if Chris, you want to give it a shot, and then we'll go to Therese, and then we're trying to see if Hillary's back into the panelist spot, and if so, we'll go back to her for the Maury perspective. So, Chris, go ahead.
Wonderful. I'll be brief. I think the question was, do different encampments have different needs? And certainly, encampments, they all have their flavor. They govern themselves a bit differently. Speaking for host, I want to make sure our approach and philosophy is that each experience of homelessness has different needs within that encampment. That's why our strategies are try to be focused on going deep with outreach workers that are relationship based. That said, it's a challenge sometimes because we need to create systems that can then be individualized to those individual people and what their particular needs are. To convey about the safe outdoor space, there's some exciting things that this safe outdoor space, led as it is by the health issue, will provide us. One is that something to be celebrated is it'll be the first program that will be accepting couples, which has been a persistent barrier within our shelter networks for a very long time in terms of finding accommodations for couples without children. The safe outdoor space, as Cole and CVC have conceptualized it, will be on the forefront of that in terms of being able to take people in with that. But largely, COC or the safe outdoor space is largely about identifying the same resources and the same goals to people. Ideally, you don't need to go through shelter to be housed. We want to house people directly from the street level, but we want to be able to approach people with services in a manner in which they'll receive those services as well. So that hospitality element is certainly at forefront as well. But with that, please, Therese or Councilman Hinds, that's all I wanted to add.
Great, thank you. So Therese is with Denver Homeless Out Loud. I think I saw you in the panelist section, but now you're gone.
My internet went out. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you for letting me speak on this. My name is Teresa with Denver Homeless Out Loud. And we have an echo, so if you can turn your volume down. Sorry. Can you turn your volume down? Sorry, having technical issues. So yeah, just to speak to the first question, I think was basically are encampments different or something to that effect. I think the long and short of that is yes, of course, but also every human being has the same needs, and so regardless of what encampment you're at, you're going to be in sorry, having echoing problems here, having to go to a different space. You're going to be in a situation where you need bathrooms, where you need water, where you need trash collection. Those are basic human needs. And so the primary difference I think that you'll see between different encampments is how much resources are being provided to those encampments or not. And right now, there's a very new and exciting step from the city that there are some encampments that are getting some trash collection provided to them, a very basic resource that folks have needed all along. And that's going to make a massive difference between the encampments that have those trash collections and then the additional, still not provided, but much needed porta potties and hand washing stations and such. So those are things that make a huge difference in like the nature of the encampment, as of course, as well as the location, the size, and so on. But I think I don't know if this is a good time to speak to some of the findings of a recent survey done at the Maury encampment, but I want to just jump to that because there's a well, okay, I'll just say this. So I recently did a survey of about 53 folks from the Maury School encampment. So there's more to be done, but just initial findings from 53 residents of that encampment. asking the basic question of when school starts back in August, what do you see as the best option for you to do? And so the options are basically housing, encampment that's run by an organization, like a safe outdoor space kind of one, or a self-run encampment, just like the current one, but just at a different location, or staying at the same spot even when school starts. And between those four options, the results are overwhelmingly that housing is the top choice. So not everybody, but by far the most of residents at that encampment choose housing as what they would like most. The second option that's getting chosen the most is that of another self-run organic encampment, street encampment like the one at Maury, but just at a different spot. The third option that's chosen is the safe outdoor space, or the encampment run by an organization. And then the last one is staying at the same spot. And I think it's important for everybody on this call to know the large majority, all but one of residents that have been surveyed thus far have all agreed that it's not an appropriate choice to stay next to the school once school starts. So that's the opinion of residents themselves. So the last thing I just want to say on that, so I think that gives us kind of a picture of where folks are at on this spectrum. And so if we're going to be talking about resolving encampments or addressing encampments, as has been talked about in this conversation, and we're going to be talking about the services and so on that people need, we need to be really real and honest about what it is that people need and what it is that people are actually getting. And what we see, by and large, is people want housing, but that is not an option that is on the table for people. When you talk about the list of services that people are being offered, moving right into an appropriate and adequate and attainable housing option is very rarely on that list of options. Let's be real about what our real options are, and also about people's rights. And so when we talk about where people can go, we have to remember that we live in a country where people have some basic human rights. You can't force people to go places like jail unless you're being done so by nature of a crime. So I guess I'll just leave it at that. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I wanted to put some of those things out there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that perspective. I think I think this is an extremely complicated topic, and I don't know if we're going to suddenly solve homelessness or answer all the questions tonight. So while it may not, I think you certainly made a good stab at it. So let's try Maury again. Hillary, can you hear me now?
All right, I've unmuted, I've restarted.
You're good.
Okay, thank you all so much. I'm just here as an advocate for our staff, our students, our family members, and then our neighbors also at Maury. I have been hearing a lot of feedback from everybody in the Maury community about how the homeless camps have impacted those living around it, all of our potential families, all of our current students that are scheduled to come in August. And there's a lot of questions and concerns. And so I wanted to be here today to hear the newest thinking of what was happening with the encampments, but also to just be a voice for all of the Maury families and the community members that have reached out to me. We also have another school inside Maury. It's called Denver School of Innovation and Sustainable Design. We're two schools in one building. And so I know I've been in touch with their principal as well, Dr. Evelyn Cruz, and we are just really hopeful that we can get to a solution quickly. I've said from the beginning, I want to do something that honors everybody's perspectives, but I also know that we have to do something on a faster timetable that I'm hearing being discussed. Yes, our students come back August 17th. Yes, our teachers come back at the beginning of August, but we have staff returning at the beginning of Monday, July 20th. So we do have personnel coming back into the building. And we need to make sure that our building is safe enough for our staff to return July 20th. So I wanted to make sure that you all heard that the August 17th is not the deadline that I'm hearing being tossed around. It's actually July 20th. And we also, I've been in touch with Trina from our central support agency with DPS about how we're going to clean up after. And she's going to enlist city hazmat officials to clean up the campus, as well as Denver Public Schools facilities crews to come and clean, and they'll need time to do that. And so I just wanted to make sure that those timetables were being discussed with this information in mind. And I also just had some questions about, like, it sounds, listening to everybody, that there's this understanding that the camp will not be around the Morey perimeter once school starts. It sounds like everybody's saying those things, but I've never heard that directly. And so I want to get this on record, like, who is going to make that decision? Who can I talk to about that? What is your deadline?
So
Well,
Bob, DDPHE, I think you just unmuted. Do you want to take that question?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's the goal. I mean, and there's a lot of things that have to be worked out, but I'm confident that that is the goal, and that's what we're shooting for. You know, I think we've talked for quite a while about some of the challenges, some of the things that we have to implement, including the safe outdoor site and some other things. But the goal would be that the encampment is not there by the time school starts. I think that was the question, or somebody you wanted confirmation of that is the goal. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think I mean, to hear people say it's a goal, sure, but I think our families also need to just hear somebody make that stand and say, no, we will not have our children be put in unsafe situations when our staff and students return. And just understanding that, you know, are we going to even be able to open our school up if this isn't changed by the time our staff returns, and then our teachers, and then our students? Can I open the school?
Well, again, I'm not the only decision maker. I mean, this is all a collaborative approach to addressing any encampment, including the one around Morey. I can tell you as the public health administrator for the city that I'm committed to getting that done before school starts. But there are many partners involved in this. I'm confident we can get there. And so, you know, I think the question about can you open up the school if the encampment is still there, I don't know I don't know that there's a lot of value in addressing that question, because the goal is that the encampment is not there before, or not there when school starts. And again, I'm confident that we can achieve that. Others might want to chime in. I see Chris has his hand up.
Yeah, Evan, I noticed you also unmuted. So we've got the mayor's office. Do you want to field that?
Yeah, Hillary, thank you for laying out the time frame and asking the question as directly as you did. I don't think it's a question that we can fully answer right here, right now, but I think you lend some new urgency to it. As Bob said, it's a collaborative challenge that we're all trying to solve together. And I think Therese Howard and Denver Homeless Out Loud and the folks who are in the encampment right now, they need to be part of the answer and the solution. I am confident that the plan we are laying out can get us there. July 20th is a little bit sooner than any of us were aware of. But again, it gives us a new sense of urgency, and by bringing folks together around a common goal, we will try to get there. We will do our best, and we will include everybody in that conversation about how to.
I have to say, I didn't hear, everybody's breaking up a little bit, and it's probably on my end. I'm trying to leave my video off, so hoping that things are coming through a little bit more clear, and I'm just on audio, but I didn't hear the July 20th. That is not a date I've heard in the past. That is a little bit more aggressive, but you know, to Evan's point, we're going to do everything we can.
I feel I'll jump in, like
Just maybe somebody can confirm that you can hear me.
Yeah, we heard you, Bob.
We can hear
Oh,
you.
okay, all right, great, thanks.
And I believe our approach, I appreciate that urgency as well. In time, there's only so much of it. Relationships, which is what we're leading with strategically to decamp, those take some time. But I think things that I'm hearing are pretty promising about our ability to meet that goal. Like I'm happy that Therese, when she's surveying folks, are identifying that there's only one person within that survey who's saying that sticking around when the kids are here is my good idea. So I think we're hearing that a lot of people, it's on the minds of folks within the encampment too, that maybe remaining around Maury's perimeter isn't the best option for them, isn't that best option for the student body and the staff of Maury as well. I think what our job is to meet them with tools and options that can overcome the uncertainty about where do I go from here. And I think Colorado Village Collaborative, in the short time that they have existed, have really provided some profound leadership with that in the tiny home villages and in other work in the community. Our outreach workers as well really are committed to a relationship forward effort here to help people move out of that encampment when there's that will. And certainly that's how we'll proceed. But I'm very happy that we're not hearing that half of the people kind of want to stick around once school starts. So how can we connect that is through having outreach workers, Colorado Village Collaborative engaging, who already has. We already initiated Colorado Village Collaborative in the outreach effort, and their strategy was to gather information about what the encampment needs to look like. It wasn't necessarily to tell them that we have the solution for you, but it was to listen to the people within the encampment about what their needs would be in a safe outdoor space. So hopefully we can translate that into something that welcomes people in the most hospitable way and gives them an option towards housing, which is the real solution.
And so this is Chris Hinds. I don't know why I introduced myself. I guess I told everyone else that you should introduce yourself. So here you are. I'm Chris Hinds, Denver City Council. And Hillary, I think in my speed talking at the beginning of the conversation, I realized, we only worked on putting this together in a week. And in that time, we've got so much interest from neighbors, so much interest from DPS parents, and so much interest from community organizations too. So I don't know if you heard, but we actually got interest from multiple school board members. And in case everyone doesn't know, because we have hundreds of people listening and watching, Denver Public Schools is its own elected body. So it is not an organization that we can tell what to do. So that's part of the multiple pieces. We can't tell people they have to, we can't force people to go into a house, as Therese said. We are humans after all, unless you're planning to detain someone. We can't tell Denver Public Schools what to do. I would say we did get multiple DPS board members who were interested in this meeting tonight. They're not available this week. And so I am committed to, as soon as they are available, I want to hold another town hall that's specifically the Maury perspective. So Maury administrators, Maury parents, and then school board members too. So that we'll have multiple elected officials from multiple different organizations. And I'm willing to do that even as early as next week. I don't know if DPS, if the board members have availability next week. And so I don't want to commit them to something that I can't tell them where to be, right? So, but if they're available next week, I'm happy to make that another town hall with a similar format as quickly as next week. So, and maybe we'll have more now that we've given you've given us additional information. Maybe we'll have more information to share by that that next town hall. So the next bit I want to talk about is we've had several questions about drug use, and so we have Lisa Reville from the Harm Reduction Action Center available as well. And so can you talk briefly, if you are still, yeah, you're unmuted. Okay, can you talk a little bit about who you are, what you do, and I believe you've also been there at Maury, right? And so maybe you could talk about your experience with drug use there at the site.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Lisa Rayville. I'm the Executive Director of the Harm Reduction Action Center. We're Colorado's largest public health agency that works specifically with people who inject drugs. While we have a robust direct services that we do, we also have a street outreach team. So I was alerted about issues at Maury a couple weeks ago and have since sent my street outreach team out there 4 times in the last couple of weeks, not only to engage with folks with resources and referrals, but to support proper syringe disposal and proper disposable injection litter, and also garbage bags. I mean, I know that was an issue for quite a while. People were trying to clean up, but didn't have the opportunity to do so. And then also talking to people about being a good community member, right? We do have a lot of folks that are staying over there. We also know that when folks are unhoused, they inject outside in alleys, in parks, and in business bathrooms. And during this pandemic, business bathrooms are pretty closed around town. So that's why a lot of folks are probably seeing more public injecting. For folks that want to know about an alternative or initiatives to reduce public injecting, they should definitely reach out to me. Part of what we're trying to push forward with is supervised use sites, much like a safe outdoor space, right? Taking it out of the public sphere and putting it into a more controlled environment. So we're very supportive of the SOS space. And we'll be a robust partner with them as well. We know this is difficult. We do go to high drug traffic areas in the city and county of Denver. So if folks are experiencing this in other areas, which I see in a lot of the webinar chat, a lot of folks are talking about other issues or other areas, we can definitely send the team out there to engage with them. We are in the midst of a parallel pandemic, the overdose crisis. And we are seeing some pretty high numbers just in Denver over the last few months of overdose deaths here in Denver. So we are very aware, we want to be very supportive, but what we've also appreciated is neighbors have reached out, come over for tours, and we've been talking about how they can be supportive and also draw boundaries with folks too. So we want to be that really supportive neighbor. Like I said, my team has been out there. We are engaging with a lot of folks that do live over there. People do find safety in community, which is why you see a lot of people camping together. A lot of our folks are going to the auxiliary shelter. However, that can be just a little further. So people, I think, do appreciate the downtown nature. But I'm here for questions, issues, concerns, or offline as well. But thank you so much for having me.
Super. Let's see. Is the fire department still here? Chief? Oh, you are. Okay. I just saw you come off mute.
Good evening, Councilman Hinds.
Good evening, sir. Thank you for participating. So our fire department is often the first on the scene, and when someone calls 911, and I'm curious to hear what your perspective is. Do you get a lot of calls around Maury? Do you get what kind of calls might those be? And if I'm wrong about how you're the first on the scene, please call me out. But I think you are, and so having that first responders perspective, I think that might be interesting too. Just to and I am curious to what do you see? And we have heard a fair number of people complain or express concern. I don't necessarily complain, but express concern about prostitution and drug use. I wonder if either of those calls are part of the reason why you might show up to Maury. And thank you.
Yeah. Good evening, everybody. I'm Manny Almaguet. I'm the Division Chief of Fire Prevention. So what that means in terms of the fire code world, that's the City and County of Denver's fire official. So predominantly the Fire Prevention Division is responsible for code enforcement and inspections. And I will speak more in that perspective, and then I will kind of segue into the first responder perspective.
You are absolutely right.
Yeah, so Denver Fire Prevention is the authority having jurisdiction for safety and code compliance. So we operate in a very black and white world of code enforcement, but we are aware and we are sensitive that this is not a black and white approach. It's a very sensitive and challenging issue. So therefore, we have taken the approach of a softer approach of enforcement, meaning that what we are finding are life safety concerns, but we have to be mindful on on how we prioritize and what we constitute as egregious. So the strategy is to monitor. So fire prevention does send a team of inspectors to the encampment sites up to twice a week. And we do monitor for any life safety issues that we would consider egregious. What we would consider egregious and what we have found would be, say, for an example, a camper tapping into a power supply of an adjacent building, which creates a hazard, or such as having a generator to supply appliances inside the encampment, whether that be a refrigerator, a cooler, a heater, or a cooking appliance. So those we would enforce and we would remove the hazard immediately. But when you start looking at some of the more challenging areas of enforcement, you're looking at such as propane use, which could be used for heating appliances and cooking. So the challenge is that is we could remove those, but they're accessible to the public and they could be there an hour later. So that's why we do the twice a week inspection. So what we've leaned more, our approach in is more on outreach and education. So our approach is to, when we do get to these encampment sites, is to basically speak with the campers and have them be in the mindset of treating this as their home. And, we do educate them on the amount of fire load, increased fire load, such as mattresses, plastics, flammables, furnishings, and to maintain safe practices and to be cognizant and mindful of the safety of their neighbors. So that's the safety approach that Denver Fire has taken, and we have been part of the multi-agency approach, and we have been collaborators in ensuring safety, and also have been working with the safe encampment site to make sure that the facility is, from a fire code perspective, compliant, that we do have access for our first responders in the event they have to get inside the area to perform rescue or to provide medical services. So that's what we do on the end on a more proactive approach. So as far as what we are finding on first responders, typically we do have our med unit, which is basically a vehicle. It's not an engine or a truck that responds to these incidences of medical emergencies. And those could be anything from a medical emergency such as a diabetic incident. But where we have to be mindful is that we always have to prepare for an incident occurring to the adjacent structure. So where you have to be mindful, if we're first on scene to stay at Maury Middle School and say that building was to have smoke showing or fire showing, we would have to have unimpeded access to the building. So we would have to be able to stretch hose lines, and we'd have to be able to hook up to the fire department connection, which augments the sprinkler system of Maury Middle School. So that's one of the reasons why we do perform these inspections, to make sure we do somewhat what we call a pre-plan, to make sure that our first responders do have access and that they are able to perform the operational objectives, such as putting the fire out or performing rescue. So if that makes sense, and I know it's kind of a long-winded answer, but that's kind of hopefully answers both of your questions, Councilman.
Awesome, thank you. So if Bob McDonald of DDPHE is still here, oh, you just unmuted. Okay, great. So another question for you about Denver's homelessness versus peer cities, and how, are we experiencing more homelessness? Is our approach different? Is it, I think, I seem to recall last week when the mayor announced a change in position about safe open spaces, that he said it was in communication with some other mayors around the nation, that he thought that was that helped his evolving thoughts, but maybe I hear from a lot of people, so maybe I could be totally off base. So, does that give you enough direction?
Well, yes, although I think the question might be more appropriate for Chris.
Sorry.
I had mentioned earlier that the approaches that we're taking are, from a public health standpoint, are not different than other health departments across the country. This safe outdoor site, that is, a harm reduction, temporary harm reduction strategy that we're utilizing and want to implement now. But I think just in terms of how homelessness is being addressed and how do we compare with peer cities, I think that Chris might be able to speak to that a little bit better than I.
Thanks, Bob. Denver's, comparatively actually pretty strong in its investments in housing, although it takes time to turn those dollars into actual units. And we're presented with different challenges. The headline not too long ago on displacement put us at number 2, right, in terms of gentrification and displacement issues. I think some of our strategies, we've led in some. We were among the first cities to adopt a housing first strategy long ago. Although we learn from other city strategies as well. Other cities have beat us to the point of having 24/7 operating emergency shelters. We existed in the state of only having overnight options for people up until this pandemic or shortly before, and we're learning along that. Our hope is to take some of the strategies that other cities have employed and learn from them and be able to kind of jump onto their experiences and figure out how to make that work here. So that means more residential shelters, but residential not meaning that that's a replacement for housing, but that the shelters are working to get people housed. That is a place you can go where you can get identified to the solution, which isn't the shelter. Where people can stay 24/7 hours a day, where people don't need to reserve their bed night to night. I think those strategies are things that we have seen elsewhere in the country function very well, and we have now experienced in Denver to also function very well, that we'll be looking to implement.
Super. Okay, so the next question, I just like to, so we have about 15 minutes left. I want to go to Ryan Taylor just to tell us a little bit about what you are working on specifically with Maury, and then with the remainder of the time, I'd like to just open it up to the panelists. There is a question about when public comment will begin. We've actually been taking comments, and all the questions that we've been asking have been given to us here. So anyway, Ryan, you want to take it away?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris. My name's Ryan Taylor. I'm the pastor and the director of Network Coffee House. And we're actually located just 2 blocks west of Maury. And we're a hospitality house for the chronically homeless. We've been around since 1982. And what we typically do, we had to pivot quite a bit since COVID started. So in the last almost 4 months now, we've been more of an emergency Band-Aid type of organization. And we hand out about 100 sack lunches every lunch time. And we have hygiene products and coffee and water. So we're supplying that community with just basic needs. And our mission here is long-term redemptive relationships. And so my role with that community is as pastor and as friend. And so I just really appreciate, Chris, you kind of starting off this meeting by the reminder that we are all people and that we are all human. And because I think that's where it starts. We have to see them as human and eventually evolve into friendships. When you evolve into friendships with this community, specifically the network community, you realize the degree of trauma that is going on in the majority of these people's lives. And by trauma, oftentimes I'm talking about childhood trauma. And so I'm very sympathetic towards Hillary in terms of wanting to communicate to her her parents and her students. I feel the same way about our community over here, 2 blocks west. I want to be able to clearly communicate with this community in terms of when they need to move next. I think one of the most difficult things, one of the most discouraging things for me was when they were asked to move from the church, they learned that morning that it was time to move. And so that was devastating to our community to learn the morning of that got to pick up and then within the next few days they started relocating over to Maury. And so I could also speak to just in terms of the concentration of folks at Maury. A lot of the other nonprofits along this corridor ended up shutting down during COVID, and we were the only ones that stayed open. And so they're going to go to where the resources are. So one of the reasons why they stayed here is because we were providing food and resources. And so that's one of the reasons for the concentration at Maury. But I just want to kind of throw my advocacy into the hat of let's communicate as clearly as possible as we can with that community what their next step needs to be, because I didn't feel like that was done with a whole lot of integrity there when they had to move from the church to somewhere else. And so yeah, that's me.
Thank you for that. And that actually, I think that still some of the comments that we're getting. We still have 122 questions, by the way, that all of you have submitted that we haven't answered yet. So we've been asking questions. We're always, obviously we have more than 250 people online right now. So I apologize that we weren't able to get to everything. But let's see. What about Ms. Ritter? You're with, I'd be curious to hear, if you are still here, your thought about our mental health safety net, and over time, has that remained the same, gotten better, deteriorated? And I'm not trying to say that everyone experiencing homelessness around Maury has addiction or mental health challenges, but I would say if I were forcibly moved, just with just a couple hours notice, that would give me some post-traumatic stress. So I mean, I can understand that even the most level-headed of people might not be quite so level-headed if they are have to constantly experience homelessness. So,
right. This is Jeannie Ritter. I hope you can hear me. And thanks,
Yes,
Councilman, for hosting. It's I would say a tip for going forward is 2 hours is a long time for everybody. But I really, the Mental Health Center of Denver, we have 3 folks here on the call, and I'm going to tap Liz. I was just chatting with her on our teams to be ready to respond to this. You've said it several times. This is really complicated. You have a lot of expertise on this call, and we've heard from lots of folks. So I look forward to, I think you mentioned early on, really putting providers into a conversation. And so we appreciate it. Liz, are you good with saying something here? And I know we have lots of community partners on this call. Liz, are you on the call?
Yeah, I'm on here.
Great. Is there anything you want to add? It's really meaningful. Tell them what you do for the Mental Health Center of Denver.
Yeah,
Thanks.
so my name's Liz Everett, and I'm the Assistant Program Manager on the Crisis Intervention Response Team. Our team works in conjunction with the Denver Police Department, RTD, and Denver Health, and we have licensed mental health clinicians that are assigned to work with these folks and respond to calls that come out that are crisis related in one way, shape, or form, potentially related to mental health incident. So we respond to calls for service, and we provide resources, community resources, mental health resources for people that have found themselves in crisis. And I know that we do also have a person that works with the homeless outreach team with Denver Police, and she has responded over to the site and offered resources to people.
Great, thank you. So we have a few minutes left. I do hear that there is that there's still interest in continuing the conversation. So I want to, as I said at the very beginning of this town hall, I want to throw it out there again. If you believe there is value in having another town hall in a similar format in the next week or two, again, depending on school board members' availability, please email district10@denvergov.org and let us know. In the similar vein, if you believe that it is valuable to have a town hall in a similar format for community resources to really focus on what can, certainly you can reach out to me, but as I mentioned, you know, I make laws. Certainly you can reach out to the mayor's office and our executive branch folks. I wonder if it would be valuable to the community to have additional knowledge of additional resources so that you can, you know who to contact if you see someone in, you know, a mental health need, or if you want to participate somehow with your time or treasure. So if either of those are interesting to you, please email district10@denvergov.org, and if we get a reasonable response, then we will work expeditiously to set that up. I recognize that there is still some some people are still somewhat unsettled because we don't have a firm commitment from the city that says, yes, definitely we'll be gone by this date. I think that we've learned a little bit tonight. I know I've learned some. I think that the mayor's office has learned some as well. So I think that knowing that the July 20th is a date that that is important, I think that's something for us as the city to take back and see how we can communicate with our you know, unhoused neighbors, with the school board, which is you know, again, its own elected group, and then you know, all the city agencies, so that we can make it a priority. So I like I said, I understand that we didn't provide all the warm fuzzies that that at least I was hoping that we were going to get tonight, but I'm also a realist that again, homelessness wasn't created in a day. It does seem that everyone is on board to want to make that happen. I know that the school board members that I spoke to want to help those unhoused near Maury to find a better place. It sounds like that community wants to find a better place and is willing to work for that. And I certainly know the mayor's office is committed to that too. So while we don't have a firm commitment of an absolute drop dead date of July 20th, at least we're moving in the right direction. And it seems like at least everyone here, and we got a whole lot of people here, are on board with making that a priority. So
Chris, just on behalf of all of the community members who are on this call who didn't get to speak up, I think what we're really interested in is being involved in the process. So whether it's Maury, whether it's St. John's, whether it's another sanctioned campsite, you need to involve the people who live in these neighborhoods in Denver in these decisions.
But I would agree with that. I think that more communication is definitely healthier. And so, yeah, I'm on board with that. Anyone else have any last thoughts? Oh, and I guess one other comment about 2 hours. I understand 2 hours is a long time. I knew that we were hitting our maximum of 500 participants at some point, and we knew that this was a conversation that hasn't been had in this large a format in a long time. So I apologize that it is that there are a lot of people here, and that it is a long time. I think it was important for us to at least start the conversation. And so thank you for your patience and your willingness to go for 2 hours. Anyone else with last thoughts? Well, wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for coming, for participating, for attending. This is the start of a conversation. Even if we don't get an outpouring of interest for the DPS specific conversation and the community conversation, obviously I'm willing to make the bold, or some have told me stupid, decision to hold this town hall, because that's, again, it's very emotional, and it's very close to where you live, and the environment around where you live is obviously incredibly intense and emotional. And when we have the people living on top of each other, nearly literally, that creates a lot of emotion and a lot of frustration and pain. And so thank all of you for being willing to come here and to have at least a reasoned dialogue. I know that sometimes I want to be unreasonable too. And but thanks for making a safe space tonight, and thank you all for participating and attending. And again, this is the middle of a conversation, not the end. So have a wonderful evening. Thank you.